Hello and welcome to the Clean Coal, Oxymoron or Opportunity webinar, brought to you by the Institution of Environmental Sciences. Today's webinar will be presented by Dr Lesley Sloss, Principal Environmental Consultant at the Clean Coal Centre. The Clean Coal Centre is a not-for-profit organisation and the foremost provider of information on the clean and efficient use of coal worldwide. Lesley is also lead on the United Nations Environment Group Coal Partnership, as well as being heavily involved in various international clean energy projects. Today she will be discussing the concept of clean coal and its future in energy production.
Good afternoon. I am honoured and delighted to have been invited by the Institute of Environmental Sciences to give this webinar today. For the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to give a brief summary of the concept of clean coal and where it fits in the future energy mix. Firstly, I must clarify who I am. I've worked for the Clean Coal Centre since 1990. As was said in the introduction, we're a not-for-profit organisation funded by several national governments, as well as some important energy-related companies and organisations. We are neither pro nor anti-coal. We do not lobby for its use, nor for the closure of plants. We merely provide up-to-date and non-partisan reviews of issues relating to the use of coal. This includes looking at how and where coal is used, and how best to reduce any negative effects of this coal use. If you check out our website at the bottom there, iea-coal.org, you will find that most of our information is free. Many of our reports are available as one-click downloads. So please do register on that site. You can receive updates of our reports, meetings, newsletters, blogs, webinars and conferences. But again, and I do feel I need to stress this, we're here mostly as a free source of information, and our focus is on reducing the environmental impact of coal where it continues to be used. So during this short webinar, I hope to answer two of the most frequently asked questions relating to coal use. Why are we still burning it, and how can we burn it cleaner? I will be around for questions for a short while at the end of this, in case I haven't answered them to your satisfaction. However, as I said, our website is there. Feel free to email me or contact us through the website, and hopefully we can get any information you need to you. So why are we still burning coal? If you read the newspapers, wind and solar are becoming affordable. Why are we still using this, what is regarded as dirty burning fuel? This is a Guardian headline from April, which said that during this day, in that month, the UK ran without coal for a full 24-hour period, and this is the first time this has happened since the Industrial Revolution, so that's quite an announcement to be made. But we do have to look at that information a little bit more carefully. The total demand of the UK is somewhere between 30 and 34 gigawatts on a daily basis, fluctuating obviously during the day and night. Now, on that particular day, 20% of the capacity supplied came from nuclear, 14% came from wind, 51% from combined cycle gas turbine, 2% from Europe, and the remainder came from pumped storage, hydro and biomass. That's quite a heavy reliance on imported gas. That's over 50% of gas that we simply don't produce ourselves. It comes from Russia. And European countries are quite lucky in that we have a network of countries we can share power amongst ourselves. If the wind is blowing too much in Denmark, they can sell it to Finland. When the wind is low across the whole of the mainland, then people turn to nuclear power in France or lignite plants in Germany. There's a sufficient capacity over the whole of the network in Europe for countries to choose the best option for their policies and plans. So the UK can announce that it plans to close all the coal-fired power plants by 2025 because it has plenty of options for alternative sources of energy, and it can ask neighbouring countries to make up the shortfall. This is not the same case for all countries, and we must bear this in mind. This triangle is very familiar to most of us in the energy industry, so I apologise for using it as if you've been to an energy meeting, you've seen this more than enough. But it is quite important. It summarises the Energy Trilemma, as we call it, and demonstrates the issues which pull energy production into areas of concern. So each country wants a secure energy supply for its population. That's at the apex. But it also wants a clean environment with fresh air, putting us down to the left corner. And it wants this clean energy to be affordable and available to all, pulling us into the economic corner. Now, unfortunately, it's often the case that negative effects on environmental protection are regarded as acceptable in order to ensure that power can be provided in growing regions. Affordability and reliability are greater priorities in the economy suffering from frequent or prolonged blackouts. People cannot live in a country that has blackouts, so they're hoping to run schools and hospitals. Reliable electricity is the number one issue facing businesses in these low-income countries. You can't grow a population and a solid economy without reliable baseload. Now, this is another article taken from the newspaper in the last month or so. It's from the Financial Times in May, and it quotes Michael Herman, who's the head of the largest coal mining company in Poland. Some of you might expect him to say something positive about coal, but you do have to take what he says on board. Poland relies heavily on coal. Its economy is built upon it, and 80% of the electricity in the country comes from coal. So the situation is quite clearly different in Poland than it is from, say, Germany, France, or Sweden. Poland has coal as part of its heritage, and so, unlike many other regions, the Polish population is actually largely in favour of continuing coal use. It's cheap, affordable, and reliable, and it employs a large percentage of its population. So coal has been used for decades, and it will continue to be used in some regions for decades yet, whether we like it or not. There is an intentional move away from coal in some regions to cheaper alternatives, maybe to gas, to nuclear or hydro, and sometimes the forced closure of older plants, either because they're too old to run anymore or they don't meet new pollution standards. And although much of the world wants to move towards low carbon fuels and renewables, there are still issues with the affordability, reliability and intermittency which need to be addressed, and I'll talk briefly about that in a minute. But from this graph you can see what's happening. This is data from the International Energy Agency, the IEA in Paris, and it predicts a significant drop in global coal use over the next 20 to 25 years. So on the left there we see coal in brown dominating quite significantly, whereas on the right, in the future, coal is definitely in decline in terms of its contribution to the energy mix. The IEA also predicts quite an impressive increase in those low carbon options on the right there in the green. The reliance in gas, in purple, remains the same, and to some extent this is not surprising. Until the reliability and intermittency of those renewables on the right there are resolved, reliable baseload will still be required, and for many gas is the cleanest and the most affordable option. These are more data from the IEA showing the changes in the key regions that use coal. So although most people think of China as being dirty and full of pollution, and it certainly does have bad incidences of urban air quality, but the coal use in these regions is actually declining. Times are changing. The Chinese government has stepped up and recognised this severe air quality issue. Emission limits for new coal-fired power plants in China are amongst the most stringent in the world. They have peaked coal in several regions. There is a lot of information out there about how China has the cleanest and most efficient coal plant fleet in the world. And I suggest you go to our website to find out more information on that if you don't believe me. The USA is also predicting to be closing coal and moving to low carbon options. This prediction was from pre-Trump, so it's unclear how Trump's vision for coal may change. However, coal in the USA is likely to see a significant resurgence, while the gas there is still widely available and affordable. Further down, the other region that is decreasing coal use, shown by that purple arrow in the orange box, is the EU. Unsurprisingly, we're moving away from conventional coal, although as mentioned, countries such as Poland may take a little bit longer in this move. Increased coal use is shown there in India. Over 300 million people are still waiting to be connected to the grid in India. And the Prime Minister Modi has suggested he's going to do that within the next 5 to 10 years. That is like electrifying the whole of a whole new USA within a very short period of time. And that kind of grid capacity can't be built upon new renewables alone. The other area of growth is Southeast Asia, especially countries like Indonesia and Vietnam. These regions see coal as useful as it fulfills several aspects of that energy trilemma: better energy security, providing non-intermittent power that is affordable. The same is true in Asia and Africa. And you'll be surprised, hopefully, by the end of this talk, you'll see that they're trying to move in this way in a more environmentally friendly way than you might think. And so I'll talk you through what's going to happen. Now, this explains what's happening with the renewables. Why aren't people just building wind and solar farms? Surely there's plenty of wind and sun around. These things are becoming more and more affordable. We're reading in the papers every day. But of course, there's still the argument that the wind and the sun isn't always available when you need it. And this is what we call intermittency. It's the instability, unreliability, and unpredictability of renewables. I discussed this in more detail in a report I produced from the Clean Coal Centre last year. And once again, it's another one of these things you can click and download for free. So I'll summarise the main points here. Now, this data shows a week in Germany in 2015, showing the range of capacity during the days and during that week, so up and down more electricity normally needed during the day. And it also shows where that electricity is coming from. On the top, we have in yellow the input from solar, then the green from wind. Along the bottom in purple there, we have the import balance of energy shared into the European grid. And in the middle, we have the major baseload coming in from the coal, lignite nuclear plants. So we can clearly see a diurnal variation for solar, which is of course to be expected, sunny during the day, not at night. Batteries and storage, will go a long way to making wind and solar more usable in the long term to cover this fluctuation. Wind is actually less predictable and can be more troublesome, especially in areas where there are strong winds, as a wind farm won't work in a gale or a storm. And a lot of people think wind is predictable, like the weather, and you'd be surprised how this is not yet necessarily the case. So here we can see that towards the end of this week, the wind picked up together, and with solar and the sun shining, produced over 65% of the power needed that day, which is absolutely incredible and what we want. However, you also have to look at the bottom of that graph there, the grey region showing coal, gas and nuclear. It's ramping up and down to fill those gaps in the electricity supply, and it's doing so in an hour-by-hour basis. Running these baseload plants in this fluctuating manner can introduce problems in terms of cost and potential plant damage. So on this graph, the renewables oscillate from producing almost none of the electricity required up to 70%. 70% would be great, but until we solve the issue of this unreliability and intermittency with energy storage, it's going to continue to be an issue, and we're going to continue to rely on baseload power. This is again data from Germany, and the situation over here is very interesting. This shows what's happening in 2008, or what has happened, and what they plan to achieve by 2050. So at the moment, they're sitting at around 85% of the power coming from conventional coal, oil, nuclear, lignite, and so on. And by 2050, they hope to be 80% renewable. They will achieve some of that by reducing their requirement by 25%, by switching to more efficient systems and so on, but they will still have this 80% reliable on renewables. What also they will do is import, and bearing in mind that some of that import might be coming from dirty coal-fired power plants in the rest of Europe. But that's a significant change to make in a short period of time. Are they going to make it? I hope and I believe that they eventually will get there, but they are meeting some troubles as they're kicking off on this challenge. And I want to bring that to the fore here, the difference between capacity as what you could produce and your demand and supply, which is actually what you actually produce. So on the left here, we have the actual capacity of different generation plants in Germany. And on the right, we have the total electricity produced by them during this month in 2013. So, okay, it's a little bit dated, but it shows what happens when you start to move from baseload power from conventional sources through to renewable sources. So despite the wind sitting at theoretically 90% of the potential capacity, it only produced 9%, the same for photovoltaics. So although the capacity is there for renewables to supply almost 40% of the German demand, they're simply not doing so in a reliable manner. Meanwhile, the coal has been grafting to make up some of that difference. Lignite and nuclear plants are running their little socks off to keep those lights on in Germany. Take nuclear out of that graph, which is supposed to be happening in the next 3 to 5 years, and you will have even more pressure on the coal and the lignite and the natural gas plants to meet that energy demand when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So the situation is currently challenging, and the cost is quite prohibitive. Electricity prices in Germany are reported to be 4 times those in the rest of Europe, and this situation may worsen. Again, I need to emphasise that this is the current situation as countries move from a carbon-based economy to a non-carbon-based one. The situation will change in the future as renewables become more efficient and affordable and energy storage challenges are solved, but for the moment, this is the reality. Populations need baseload power. And so for many countries, especially those with no expertise in nuclear, no access to affordable gas, they'll continue to see coal as the one way of getting cheap, reliable baseload power to their growing populations. Okay, so putting aside whether we want people to continue to use coal or whether we believe they should be doing so, we have to accept that these regions are still going to use coal. This is the reality. So how do we make it cleaner? Well, short of not burning any, we can burn less. The most obvious way to reduce emissions from coal is to simply burn less coal, and this can be done by improving the efficiency of the plant. Between the 1920s and the 1990s, the increase in efficiency of the combustion systems and steam turbines was such that we now get 5 times more electricity out of the same amount of coal. This obviously means lower emissions as well, and this advancement is continuing. Even coal-fired power plants that we see running today can be tweaked and upgraded to ensure that the efficiency improves and less coal is needed. This graph is a bit technical, so stick with me. These are data for 2015 and show the coal generation capacity in different regions of the world alongside the coal plant efficiency. Now, most plants out there are what we call subcritical plants. They work at normal pressure and high temperatures to create steam, which turns a turbine, which makes the electricity come on. A little bit more complicated than that. But most of these subcritical units were designed to run at between 34 and 37% efficiency. That's what you can expect from an older plant. Older units, or units firing lower grade, dirtier coal, such as those in Russia and the Czech Republic, may actually now be running at 5 to 10% lower than their design efficiency. This means that coal and energy is being wasted and emissions are higher per megawatt hour than they need to be. So a little bit of time and investment in maintenance, maybe a boiler upgrade, could mean that these plants could return to their design efficiency or even perform better than before. So we see potential efficiency as being much higher. Now, as soon as you're burning less coal for more power, your CO2 emissions come down because carbon in is carbon out times efficiency. So what we see is a potential reduction simply by improving the performance of your plant, which is obviously a win-win situation as everybody wants to produce more electricity from less coal. And what we're seeing here on the left-hand columns is that there's a huge potential reduction in CO2 output. And to some extent, some countries could actually read their CO2 reduction targets through efficiency means alone, without closing any of their plants, just keeping them running and running them more efficiently. Now, again, a little bit technical. We've been talking about subcritical plants that run at normal pressures and get up to 30, even 40% efficiency if you tweak them properly. But there are new plants coming out there running at higher temperatures, higher pressures, and can achieve higher efficiencies. These burn in boilers and run turbines with new materials that have to cope with the new stresses and strains of these systems, so they're a little bit more expensive, but these costs will come down as these things become standard. There are several commercialised projects underway in the countries listed here, showing that plants are achieving 50% or even more efficiency. That's over 20% more power out of some of the plants we see when we take a train journey. This means significantly more CO2 reduced and other pollution emissions also coming down. So this is the future and it's happening now. Coal-fired power plants are running leaner and greener than you could ever imagine. We're talking about, on the left there, the high efficiency systems I've just talked about, higher pressure and more power out of the same. That's an HE, higher efficiency system. In the middle there, you have low emissions, LE, where you're putting on the state-of-the-art emission control systems. These are going to reduce your emissions of major pollutants such as SOx, sulfates, NOx, nitrates, and particulate matter, which cause acid rain, ozone, and nitrification of soils. State-of-the-art emission systems on coal-fired power plants these days reduce particulate emissions by over 99.9%. That's what they do. That's not just the best ones, that's most of them. And depending on the coal type and the plant type and the amount of money you prepare to spend on it, your NOx and SOx emissions can be controlled by over 70, 80, even 90%. So together these are known as HELI technologies. And when you've got a HELI plant that's running this clean and this efficient, popping a CO2 capture system onto the end of it is really, really simple. Your gas is already clean enough to go into a capture system, and HELI plants are designed with space for this to happen when CCS is ready to go. And so here we have a slide showing the advancements over time. So we've gone from back in the 1980s in the Latrobe Valley in Australia, we had plants running at 29% efficiency, producing 1,400 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Going through state-of-the-art plants in Europe now, running at 43, 44% efficiency, with CO2 down at 930, to the new systems where we'll be running at 55% efficiency, 740 grams of CO2. So we get efficiency up and we get CO2 emissions down. The same going for the hard coal. Efficiencies of 30% have come up to 45% and could reach 50% within the next few years. Meanwhile, CO2 emissions are dropping to almost half of what they were. So we're getting twice as much power out, but half of the CO2. That's something to be quite pleased about, I guess. So you've heard of people talking about the 2DS, the 2 degrees scenario. This is the IEA defined scenario whereby action is taken to ensure that global average temperature does not increase beyond 2 degrees centigrade, which is quite scary. And we're actually on a trend to be more than that. But this is the target, to get down to only a 2 degree increase in temperature. Now, according to an IEA study to which the Clean Coal Centre contributed, CCS will have to be deployed on these coal-fired power plants within the coming decades to keep us within this 2 degree scenario. So efficiency in the top there is going to get us some of the reduction in emissions that we need, but a big chunk of it is genuinely going to have to come from CO2 on the coal sector in Europe. Now, again, you're saying to me, well, just stop burning the coal. But this 2 degree scenario takes into account all that we can possibly do in terms of renewables, fuel efficiency, better plants, moving from coal to gas, doing anything we can in all sectors. What we're talking about here is bearing in mind that we have to have these coal plants to make sure we have enough power for the population. Even with that, CCS is going to be a big chunk, that 12% of the keeping us within this 2 degrees scenario. So without it, we're heading towards the 6 degrees. A big chunk of help is coming from the renewables we're going to be doing. A lot of the middle is coming from efficiency, but that CCS, that blue thing, is really quite important to get us there in the end. So I can hear your next question coming now. Is CCS going to work? Is it working? Is it going to be affordable? Now, it's not my speciality. So we have some great staff in the office who have given me a couple of slides to show here. And if you do have any questions on this, then you can try me at the end and I'll try to answer them. If not, I'll obviously pass them over to Toby and the others in the office, or you can download information from the website. So yes, there are projects up and running. They have 21 CCS projects worldwide, around somewhere between 30 and 40, the increase happening this year, of megatons per year of CO2 being captured. And this should continue to increase. Now, of these 21 projects currently running, only 3 are coal-fired power plants. However, we do have another 3 plants in advanced planning, that means almost ready to switch on, and another 6 in early stage planning. So things are starting to happen. And this is part of the problem with the CCS situation, is that it's going through a bit of a complicated cycle. Now, originally, I'm not taking you through this in detail, don't panic. I'm going to talk you through a very brief overview. Initially, there was big excitement about CCS on the back of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Special Report on Carbon Capture and Storage. Lots of government funding was allocated and things seemed to be moving. Everything was very exciting. However, everything started to go a bit wrong. We had failure at the Copenhagen COP. the financial crash, falling oil prices, which killed enhanced oil recovery projects in China, falling gas prices in the USA, collapse of the EU CO2 prices, a whole bunch of things happening around a sort of perfect storm that kind of reduced the CCS interest in investment quite significantly. However, there is a bit of a turnaround happening now, renewed interest in China and Norway. COP21 is ramping up efforts on climate change. The cancellation of the UK project isn't helping, and Trump pulling out of Paris is generally seen as a bad sign. But if you read the recent press, many countries and even several states within the USA itself plan to carry on their commitments to the Paris Convention regardless. So there's a bit of a reflux. It's coming back. CCS is absolutely not dead. And to prove it, here we have the 3 CCS projects which are currently trundling away. We have 2 in USA and 1 in Canada. These projects have the advantage of them having cheap coal nearby, and having an oil company prepared to pay for the CO2 produced, as they're going to be using that for enhanced oil recovery. And this is the problem at the moment, is that without economic and geographical advantages, no one seems to want to risk private funding to develop further projects. Risks such as those of stranded assets are too high. And Toby, one of our staff, has produced a fantastic report looking at the challenges in getting CO2 carbon capture and storage through to reality. And I do suggest you log on and download that. So HELI is what the world needs to deploy if we plan to continue using coal for power generation. Now, ideally, all emerging economies would be encouraged to continue to consider their options for electricity production. And should coal be one of their only options, which we have to accept for some regions it is, then all new coal plants should be HELI systems, the cleanest plants available to them. Now, in recent years, there have been some issues with multinational banks tightening their lending criteria to ensure that emerging economies were only building clean plants, which was good news. Unfortunately, some of these criteria were so tight, including CO2 emission levels that couldn't be met without carbon capture or storage, which of course isn't really commercially available yet. So this meant that many countries going to these multinational banks for funding were being refused on the grounds that the cleaner plants weren't available. And in these cases, they're still going to want to burn coal, and so they're going to go to another lender with less stringent criteria, and they're going to build a cheaper, dirtier plant, which is going to lock in dirtier emissions for the next 20, 50, 60 years of plant operation. And so the lenders are going through a rethink, and we're going to be ensuring that funding is available to promote HELI technologies where any new coal plant has to be built. And though we, maybe 5 years ago, would have thought that was quite a challenge because these newer plants are regarded as more expensive, the change is actually happening quite significantly. Now, this chart shows the amount of capacity of new build plants in coal being supplied by the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean manufacturers. That's where most of the power plant kit is being built and exported from these days. This shows data from 2017 to 2022 from Platts database. And encouragingly, we're seeing an overwhelming preference for these emerging economies to buy plants which are supercritical or ultra supercritical. They're buying the state-of-the-art clean plants. There are a few down there, 650 megawatts of blue plants. These are smaller subcritical units. However, we don't expect them to last for as long. So Japan and Korea appear to have abandoned supplying subcritical clean steam systems. They are only selling supercritical and ultra supercritical systems. And if this chart is an indication, the trend of Asian financial institutions funding technologies might be advancing faster than we ever thought or ever expected. I'm going to reach the next sentence twice because it's quite important. Investing in low emission coal plants in Southeast Asia will reduce more emissions than the transition to renewables in Europe. This is from the ASEAN Centre for Energy and the World Coal Association. So what they're saying is these coal power plants being built around the world are being built. The fact that they're building them as supercritical and ultra supercritical high efficiency plants mean that they're going to reduce predicted CO2 emissions more than the action being taken to move towards renewables in the EU. Climate finance for low emission coal is going to reduce emissions equivalent to 1.3 billion tonnes in the next 20 years. So let's look at what we thought was going to happen and what is actually happening. This is a study we did for the International Energy Agency a couple of years back, looking at heli technology deployment. What we see is base case. That is assuming that everybody that has a coal-fired plant is going to keep the coal-fired plant they've got, but any new plant they build is going to be ultra supercritical. Let's look at what would happen if the rules changed, and if your plant is now 50 years older or more, you have to replace it with a cleaner plant, and it has to be a supercritical or ultra supercritical, and if available, an advanced ultra supercritical when they become commercially available. So what we will see is, instead of in the base case where coal stays the same and emissions are going up, 50-year retirement strategy means that you start to see older, dirtier plants being phased out and newer, more efficient plants coming in faster. Take that up to a 25-year retirement scenario, which means that any plant over 25 years old has to be replaced by something newer. And all of a sudden you get a change in cleaner plants coming along faster. So here's what was happening in Poland. As I said before, unlike the rest of Europe, Poland seems quite keen to keep its coal-fired power plants going for a couple of years yet as part of its economic security. So what we see here is that this is the 25, this is a best case scenario. So the predicted along the line, top line there, blue line, is the growth in expected requirement from energy from the coal sector. If Poland were to continue to build subcritical plants to meet this electricity demand, then CO2 emissions in red would also follow that and would increase. But what we can see here is a program to replace all plants over 25 years old with supercritical and ultra supercritical units and advanced when they become available. So we can see that the energy demand is going up in blue, but this will actually be met by fewer plants. The capacity is coming down because we're producing more power from less coal. And so the CO2 emissions will also stop increasing. They will actually start to decline towards the end of this prediction, even before CCS is brought into the argument. Now let's look at India, the fastest growing fleet after China. We know India needs a lot of new energy capacity, 200,000 people looking for energy within the next 5 years, according to Modi. So even if it tries to produce a lot of that from renewables, the existing coal fleet will be continued to run as baseload for many years yet, and we know they're going to build some clean coal plants to fill in that capacity gap. So the blue line along the top there shows demand increasing. This is just focusing on demand from coal, not demand from all electricity sectors. So with combined use of supercritical systems, that red CO2 emissions line is actually going to peak and is going to start to come down. So although they're having greater capacity of coal, there are fewer plants, more efficient plants, CO2 is coming down, they're getting more power from less coal. And all this is happening even before we bring carbon capture and storage into this situation. So this is from the Financial Times just a few weeks ago, the Indian Minister for Power expressing his concern over the unreliability and intermittency of renewable power. You know, it only works during the day, what we're going to do at night. And until energy storage issues are solved, he has a little bit of a point there. But he's also agreeing that a move towards clean coal heli technologies will mean emissions reductions in all pollutants, whilst guaranteeing that they meet this growing energy demand. He also expresses concern of the cost, emphasising that the Western world is responsible for the historical CO2 emissions and that emerging economies shouldn't be expected to cover the cost of remediating this. So coal use is going to be used in these countries. The plants built are ultra supercritical and advanced ultra supercritical systems. Then the effects can be minimised. And it's actually happening. On May 24th this year, the third unit of the 3 times 660 megawatt supercritical unit at the Prayagraj plant in Uttar Pradesh was commissioned. And this brings the total supercritical plants being built in the last 17 months in Uttar Pradesh alone to 6, which is an incredible movement in the right direction. India has built its first solar-powered airport as well. Times and changes and things are happening. So although there is plenty of green and renewable projects, coal is still going to be an important part of the energy mix in India. But bringing heli into it is going to make a huge difference to the environmental effects that occur. Now, the ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. I mentioned them earlier. Along with the World Coal Institute, they published a report a few months back, noting that these countries are going to need more power to bring electricity to their growing populations. And they're talking about 800 terawatts of hour every year. Renewables for this amount of capacity is not available or affordable yet, and it would require another 500 billion in extra capital investment over there. So although we want that to work, what they're saying is they can't afford to make this work. They haven't got the time and the availability of materials to make this work. So over there, they still see coal as available and affordable. And as I mentioned earlier, by ensuring that they're using these state-of-the-art HELI plants, growth in CO2 emissions will not be stopped, but it will be controlled. And if the region were to take up the speedy replacement of older units with the cleaner units, then the emissions will actually start to come down, and could come down so effectively that current CO2 reduction challenges in some regions would be met, if not exceeded, just by focusing on the coal sector and the changes in it. So is it all possible? Is it happening? Well, we are on our way to some truly impressive state-of-the-art power plants. This is the Wagao No. 3 plant in Shanghai. It is one of the cleanest, most beautiful, if you can consider plants as beautiful plants in the world, both inside and out. You can walk through this plant with white gloves on and come out the other end and your gloves will still be white. This is what they're aiming at as becoming standard coal-fired power plants. And I'm not going to talk you through this, but what we see is that this plant is almost like a work in progress, a big research project. It produces power reliably, but they're continually upgrading and tweaking this plant so that on year, its net efficiency is increasing and its coal consumption is going down. So we're getting more power out of less coal. And if you know your data at the top there, the emissions coming out of this coal-fired power plant with state-of-the-art emissions control technologies is down to the same kind of levels you would see, the same orders of magnitude of a gas plant. So we're talking about new coal-fired power plants being almost as clean and as efficient as gas-fired power plants for countries which don't have access to gas. This is extremely exciting. So I'll finish up now. I'll sit around for questions, obviously, but the conclusions are that regions are still going to use coal, whether you like it or not. I don't mean it like that, but it is still regarded as a cheap and secure source of power in some regions. We're talking about nations of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and even in Europe, Bosnia, Serbia, Romania. Renewable alternatives, with and without power storage, are considered some regions to be too expensive, otherwise they would be the plant of choice. Now, obviously, these costs are coming down. Energy storage is around the corner, and they will be the plants of the future, but we're still on this side of that corner, and the growing economies need that power now. Now, state-of-the-art coal-fired power plants are very, very different from most people think about when they think about coal. New plants are becoming as clean and as efficient as gas-powered plants, and affordable CCS is becoming closer to reality. Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, there's a list of 72 countries which are building or planning new HELI coal plants now. These are state-of-the-art clean gas plants, carbon capture ready. And this must become standard. And this appears to be actually happening faster than expected. So HELI and clean coal is acting as a bridge towards cleaner energy, while renewable energy intermittency and energy storage issues are solved. And so perhaps counterintuitively, the move to clean coal technologies will be an important and effective part of moving towards a low carbon economy. So I've spoken through that very quickly, and I've covered an awful lot of material, I understand. I believe the webinar will be available for you to play slow or on catch up later. And as I said, I will be prepared to try and answer some of your questions. But this is expertise from a whole bunch of people I presented here today. And hopefully I've raised your enthusiasm and intrigued you, and you're prepared to go to our website there and find out more information. As I say, most of that information is free of charge, or you can email me.
Thank you, Lesley. That was a really interesting webinar. It's really engaging, and I've had quite a few questions come in while you were speaking. So my first question is from Daniel, and he is asking, what is the IEA's estimate on the cost of CCS as a % of operating cost or per megawatt?
I am not even going to pretend I can pull that number out of the air. I wish I could. However, I know for a fact that there's a man in the office that could do that for me. So I'm going to ask whoever asked that question to either email me there or to look in the website. I'll be more than happy to give you not just information on that, but probably a report looking at where those numbers come from.
Melissa, she joined slightly late, so she may have missed the lead up to this point, but she said you point out that some markets only have coal as an option for power. Can you elaborate a little bit more on where this is true and why?
No, that's hopefully not what I said. It's certainly not what I meant to say. What I said at the beginning is that many countries regard the energy trilemma as the issue. They have to have secure and affordable power. And while they may want to have renewables, renewable cannot supply baseload at this stage. Some countries have no access to gas. They don't have the skills to run nuclear, and they're sitting basically on land covered in coal. And so to them, the obvious option, it's cheap, it's secure, it's affordable, we have it here, we have a population that's lived with it. A lot of countries like Poland are built on the backbone of coal. They don't see it as a bad thing. And so our opinion on it has to be reeled back, and we have to accept that some of these countries, that is not necessarily their only option, but it's certainly an option that they see as most economically viable and sensible for their growing populations.
Another question that we had from David was, he points out that coal is a heavy material to transport and has environmental costs in relation to its extraction. Can these be made cleaner or less polluting, or is this being examined as well as the power stations themselves?
That's a wonderful question, because that is the report that I'm actually working on now. So if that delegate would like to contact me, I could be prepared to send a draft report to them. Yes, there is huge impact. There's somewhere between, they estimate, between 5 and 15% of the environmental impact of coal is actually before it gets to the coal-fired power plant. You're talking about trucks and mining land and water being moved around. Yes, the impact is huge, and yes, it can be reduced. So please do get in touch about that report as the information. I'm just putting that together now.
He also asked another question which followed on slightly. He said, will water or lack of its availability be a constraint to new coal plants in parts of the world, such as India, despite what politicians have said?
I'm loving this. People are so tuned in. Yes, absolutely. Obviously, especially if you're running a flue gas desulfurization plant, a lot of water gets used in coal production, right from mining through to the end. And it's a huge issue, especially in regions where water scarcity is an issue. We have several reports of these produced by Anne Carpenter in the office. You can download for free. But what I'll try to summarise is, yes, there are ways of making plants more efficient so that they use less water, they recycle it. There is the new state-of-the-art plant in South Africa, I think is it Majuba, that is dry air cooling. So they're trying not to use any water at all in these regions. What is also becoming an issue or an option is to reuse water, or to use less water, or to import water from more recyclable or reusable or areas. So, for example, coal mining in Powder River Basin, what they're trying to do is water being produced during coal bed methane extraction is reused. Rainwater is captured and reused at most of the mine sites in South Africa. And in fact, in one of the plants in South Africa, they capture so much water on the mine site and clean it so well that they actually give that to the local community. So they're actually feeding water in as opposed to taking it out. India announced a couple of months ago that there is a project for taking water from sewage treatment plants, cleaning that up and using that in the coal-fired power plants. And there are several projects to do that underway. So yes, a lot of exciting new developments happening in trying to reduce the amount of water required for coal-fired power plants.
I've also got another question from Chris, and he said, with regards to CSS, he understood one of the main constraints was its very high energy use, which reduces overall efficiency, and asked, has that been taken into account in the figures that were presented today?
Yes, I presume so, because Toby that produced that slide for me is completely on the ball when it comes to CCS and what's happening there. I'm not going to try and answer those CCS questions anymore. I do apologise. It's not my subject, and I would hate to get the information wrong. I'll pass on all those questions to Toby, and he can get back to you personally.
This may be a similar question along that line, but Andrew Davies has asked, when pollution from production is considered, how might this affect the tonnes of CO2 per gigawatt hour quotient for various fossil fuels?
If I understand the question, are you saying if you take in the CO2 produced during the mining and transport and adding that on to the emissions from the coal-fired power plant? As I said, it's somewhere between 5 and 15%, they reckon, is the amount of extra emissions of CO2, I should specify that, adding into, but it will vary from site to site, and I'm not sure that anybody's really done as much research as they should in that area. But as part of the report I'm doing now, so I might be able to answer that question in future. If he wants to email me, I'm happy to keep in touch.
Will your report, once published, be fully available on the website?
The report I'm doing just now on the impacts of mining will be available on the website, as all ours are, straight away. If you're not a member country, which unfortunately the UK isn't, you can pay £100 and buy it, or you can wait 6 months and then it will be free of charge. However, if you're an expert in this area and you want to help me on the draft of this report, I would be happy to share the draft with you at an earlier stage, on the assumption that I get some feedback and help from you for that.
Okay, that's brilliant. Hopefully people will follow you up on that. Those are all the questions that were submitted for while you were speaking. So unless there's anything else that you would like to add, just want to thank you for your time. That was really, really engaging webinar. And obviously people have had some really interesting questions to follow on from it. So yeah, thank you for presenting.
I always do. I always reply to emails, and I can't emphasize enough, our information is mostly free, and that's what we're here for. So please do get in touch. Thank you.
And thank you all for joining. There will be another webinar presented by us in July, and further details will be on the website shortly. Thank you.